You're watching Notepad. I'm your host, Ibrahim Sani. The FBM KLCI closed at a record low today at 1424 points, or 1,424 points. This after broad-based selling as global equities took cue from the crude oil prices over 30% drop to some $30 a barrel after OPEC failed to strike a deal with its allies regarding production cuts amid the COVID-19 outbreak. Worst hit was the energy index, which tracks oil and gas-related share prices, after the gauge dropper of 256 points, or over 25%, to 754.95. Across Bursa Malaysia today, 6.66 billion, again 6.66 billion shares were traded at 3.63 billion ringgit, and Bursa registered at its all-time high trading volume on August compared to August 20th, 2014, when the exchange saw 7.67 billion shares transacted. To make things worse, over at international markets, global share markets tumbled as panicked investors fled headlong to bond to hedge the economic trauma of the coronavirus, and the oil plunged more than 30% after Saudi opened the taps in a price war with Russia. One analyst argued that oil at $30 per barrel is almost certain to push inflation in developed countries like Malaysia, which are already struggling with very low inflation rates, which is not like Malaysia, also into negative territory. This will have an impact on monetary policy. Like Malaysia, we don't know how it's going to impact it here, as policymakers see the space and further impetus to further loosen monetary policy as they try to keep prices from spiraling into an uncontrollable deflationary cycle. So joining us is Han Tan of FXTM here to discuss this and more. Han, we've seen two price cuts this year. Do you envision Malaysia seeing another price cut in the very near horizon?
Right. I think Bank Negara will be guided by how these risks manifest themselves to the domestic economy, right? You recall the 25 basis point cut in January. That shocked many of us in the markets. Well, the second one more recently, earlier this month, was perhaps more well expected. With the Fed having that emergency 50 basis point cut last week, I think that gives a lot of breathing room, not just for Bank Negara, but also central banks around the region to make sure that they have enough supportive measures rolled out into the economy to try and offset the downside risks from this coronavirus. Okay,
but we've seen also that the KLCI dipped tremendously. If I can just pull up this particular graph on KLCI, my producer will just do it in a very short time. Can we really explain what happened with that plunge that we saw in the morning of Monday, where it just dropped off a cliff?
Right. Well, look, we are seeing this broad sell-off, not just for Malaysian stocks, but also Asia, and also right now as we speak, we are seeing this tremendous sell-off in US equities as well. It's hitting S&P 500, hitting limit down, I believe.
Yeah.
When I checked before I came on the program, right? Now, my area of expertise is not in the equity space. I look at the FX space. And if you look at the ringgit for today, right, it was Asia's worst performing currency against the dollar today.
Yeah.
It weakened against all Asian currencies for today as well. The idea or the narrative driving that is because Malaysia is still seen as this net energy exporter. And earlier in the program, you mentioned Malaysia's fiscal standing. So with the removal of GST, Malaysia's fiscal position is now more reliant on Petronas's whatever Petronas can contribute to the government, right?
Yeah.
We have special dividends, regular dividends, etc. Yeah. So I think it's this mindset that is making investors cautious of not just Malaysian assets, currencies and equities, but also just risk assets as a whole.
Okay, it's nice that you brought in oil and also Petronas, because GPS in Malaysia now has 4 full ministers, and one of them is, of course, the Menteri Perdagangan Dalam Negeri and Hal Ehwal, basically Consumer Affairs Minister. He's going to take into consideration the price fluctuations, not just domestically in Malaysia. I'm talking about, chicken and rice and all the other stuff, but those that are currently happening in Sarawak as well as Sabah to manage inflation. But this is on the back of him trying to push forward the Sarawak agenda and Sarawak narrative. How do you think he's going to balance these kind of conversations, both here in the Federation of Malaysia of Semenanjung as well as in Sabah and Sarawak, and tie this in with all the other ongoings right now, for instance, the ringgit and all the other fluctuations?
Okay, so let's try and divide this up. Yeah. So on one hand, if you look at, say, how we have gone to the weekly floating mechanism for oil prices as long as it stays below 2 ringgit and 8 cents for around 95, right? So that should bode well for, say, headline CPI. Okay, and so that should keep inflationary pressures manageable. Now, on top of that, if you talk about, say, the ringgit, the weaker ringgit, and perhaps the risk of imported inflation, well, guess what? That hasn't really translated into headline CPI over the last couple of years or so. In fact, if you zoom out and look at a global trend, what you're seeing is this disinflationary pressures, not deflation, but slower inflation. And this is what many central banks, the Fed, the BOJ, the ECB, is really trying to do to hit their respective price target goals, about 2% or so. So overall, I think Malaysia's headline CPI, that appears to remain manageable. So that in turn should allow Bank Negara to ease if the economic conditions warrant them to do so.
Okay, and of course another element I want to touch on is of course the conversation of oil and Sabah and Sarawak, particularly Sarawak right now with Malaysia. You were alluding just now on the fact that Petronas is going to be heavily regarded or heavily relied upon by the federal government for income. That was last year. This year is going to be very tricky. Again, with Sarawak being in the picture, there's going to be conversation of Sarawak asserting more of their rights, which is also enshrined in the MA63 argument. There's a lot of legal opinions on this, but whatever it is, this is going to be front and center of the new finance minister and how he wants to manage oil and the conversation with Sabah Sarawak and MA63 and the income of the government. How do you think it's going to balance all these levers?
Right, so that's why I think it's imperative that these incoming policymakers not just take these near-term considerations, and by that I mean the gyrations in the oil prices and what may happen to Petronas over the short term. Once again, I think what we are seeing right now is a clear case for GST, or at least a clear case for a diversification of income revenues to the government, right? Now, how...
It's not going to be politically sound to reintroduce GST.
And this is where, as a market analyst, I'm able to, perhaps stay away from the political considerations and view this from what is proper or what is perhaps more acceptable in the market's mindsets, right? So I think it's looking at the fundamentals and looking at the hard numbers beyond some of the political and sentiment that's perhaps engulfing the cabinet moving forward.
Okay. And the world is not just about the finance ministry and just not just about this. There's many others that we can talk about in the cabinet, including that of the Minister of International Trade and Industry, Azmin Ali, which is going to be looking into APEC, that's happening towards the end of the year. One would say that Waston Mahathir is, most looked after or looked forward to event, which is now falling under the hands of Azmin. That's one element. There's also the element of a few ministers handling economy. Most notably, of course, is Tok Pa, which is going to look at the minister in the Prime Minister's department that overlooks the economy. How do you think this whole conversation of ministers in the PM's department looking into the economy, international trade, finance ministry, MEA is no more. How do you think they're going to streamline everything and translate into actionable goals or perhaps even a policy that is geared towards helping the people?
Yeah, I think that's a very, very pertinent question, and certainly one that investors are clearly looking out for. And I think the short answer, at risk of sounding like a cop-out, look, only time will tell, right? So at this point, we know who is there, and we know some of the perhaps policy expectations in place, but then what is actually put on the table, and then of course there's execution.
Do you feel comfortable with somebody like Tok Pa looking into the economy of Malaysia?
Yeah, well, given Tok Pa's previous stint as the MITI minister, I think I've only heard good things about him, and he's done well under that portfolio, and that's also a key portfolio because keep in mind, say exports account for, according to the World Bank, about 130% of Malaysia's GDP. About 40% of the jobs here in Malaysia are tied into export-related activities. So that is certainly a crucial part of the Malaysian economic story, but also the Malaysian population's socio-economic well-being, right? So I think that'll be key. And then also keep in mind some of these recent campaigns that the Malaysian government has to undertake, on the MITI front, also on the commodities front, will be how do you negotiate RCEP, or how do you negotiate trade deals with other major trading partners, and also how do you try and perhaps dilute some of the tensions between the EU and Malaysia when it comes to the commodity space. Palm oil is key for our export sector as well. So there are all these considerations, and it'll be, I think, exciting to look forward to what these policies actually put on the table, and then after that we'll worry about execution risk.
Yeah, okay. When you talk about past track record, I mean, Topa is, I guess a lot of people are sitting well with his track record. However, Azmin Ali's track record as Minister of Economic Affairs is spotchy, right? I mean, there's nothing much other than the 2013 Wawasan Kemakmuran Bersama or Shared Prosperity Program, which we don't know whether it's going to be continued in this government. We don't know yet. Time will tell. I like your point there. But how do you think Azmin will drive forward the international trade and industry business of Malaysia? Remember, past meaty ministers have always had interesting things to tell. The stories that they have shared is going to be always interesting. Do you think that Azmin is in a position where he can actually show or have something to show moving forward when he helms this particular ministry?
Well, I think the impetus is clearly there, right? Now it's a case of, again, communicating to your stakeholders, not just here onshore, but all around the world as well, whether or not you have the policies that are in place. I think when it comes to the markets, at least, it's not so much personality-driven. It'll be more policy-driven, right? And that is still a question mark. I mean, to be fair, it's only been, what, a few hours since we have heard of this cabinet lineup. And I think it's going to look. Investors have got plenty to keep themselves occupied with now.
Of course.
But as the dust settles, and if once they take into consideration Malaysia's medium-term to long-term outlook there, I think that's when the policies, as and when they're ready, they'll fall into place, and that's going to be a matter of time, really.
Okay. With this in mind, oil prices plunging more than 30%, the worst since 1991. We've seen KLCI drop more than 50 points. We're now languishing at, the levels of 2011. We've seen big stocks taking a hit. And ringgit is, as you rightfully put it, we're performing badly against nearly all currencies, more so against safe haven currencies, yen and ringgit. Really bad story to be told. American dollar as well, US dollars. How do you think that investors should position themselves, at least in the near term, moving forward? What are the 2 or 3 things that we can really look forward to, or at least plan moving ahead, knowing all this is in place? Okay,
perhaps just allow me, Ibrahim, to paraphrase some of what you mentioned there. I think, to be clear right off the bat, I'm not allowed to share investment advice, but what I can...
the things that you look out for, right?
Yeah, definitely. So what we can share and what we're observing in the markets and from our discussions with our various stakeholders is, look, there is this clear risk of sentiment, and that's really saying the least. If you look at how gold prices jumped very suddenly towards 1,700 right now, elevated in the mid-1600s.
Yeah.
You look at the yen falling down to about, strengthening towards 102 against the US dollar. So 100 could come into play over the coming weeks. So that, and I think, as you mentioned at the top of the show, U.S. Treasury yields, 10-year yields at record lows, right, below 0.5%. So all these are clear indicators that market...
All-time low U.S. bond yields, that's what we're getting at.
Right, and it's not just U.S. Treasury yields as well. You look at MGS, 10-year MGS below 3%. So there is this flight to safety that comes at expense of the sell-off in stocks and other risk assets, commodities today as well. I think once the dust settles, or rather, I think the dust settles only when investors are shown meaningful signs that the coronavirus outbreak, that is stabilizing, right? And then as the stimulus measures work its way through the respective economies, be the US, Malaysia, and everyone else in between, and then that gets translated into the hard data. I think, as those kind of more supportive signs come through, then markets will only be more confident towards, venturing back out into more risk-on waters. But until then, over the last few weeks, it's clearly been risk-off signs flashing everywhere.
One person or one portfolio that we really need to talk about, but I don't think we are fully equipped to talk about it, is, of course, the Minister of Health. The new Minister of Health is Dr. Adham Baba. I don't know who he is, but a quick check on online just now before we started the show. He's a medical doctor, he's a GP, graduated from He's when you have a medical doctor running the health ministry, first of all, you check a lot of boxes already. But more importantly, this addresses a bigger concern on how people are going to spend, right? Demand for oil is being impacted because of the coronavirus. Travel is down. We've seen Malindo being told to halve their salaries. Malindo staff is taking a 50% pay cut moving forward. Flybe, the airline, has has been dead. That's it, killed, no more, kaput. These are the industries and sectors that are going to be hit by this particular sector. How do you think the new health minister, and again, neither of us are doctors here, how do you think we can approach this moving forward? Because Dr. Adham is coming against or on the back of Dr. Zul, the previous health minister, which is well loved, well liked, and well popular. How do you think he's going to navigate this?
Yeah, look, I mean, you raise a good point. It's not like investors are disregarding the human toll from this coronavirus outbreak, right? You know, that is the most tangible number, so to speak, as perverse as that sounds, you know, but that is the number that they can keep track of right now. Everything else, when it comes to, say, the economic data, they've only just started coming in. For example, China's PMI for February that just came in not too long ago, right? And then a lot of the GDP figures for the fourth quarter pre-coronavirus. So it won't be till like April, May when we get all these GDP figures and other hard data, you know, that investors that can then digest to really ascertain the full and eventual economic toll from coronavirus. So there's the economic considerations. There's certainly the human, the human element to it, which is very much front and center right now. So the complexities and all these different facets that stem from this coronavirus outbreak warrants a multifaceted approach. And to be fair, you know, the government, even the previous iteration of the Malaysian government, has done well on that front. So you don't just have Bank Negara on a monetary policy front easing interest rates to help support the Malaysian economy, because that's primarily on the demand side. Then you've got a healthy mix of supply side policies and also demand side policies that Tun Mahathir announced just a few days ago. And then at the same time for the human...
Oh my God, yeah, you're right. Just a few days ago,
Right, and so then you've got the Minister of Health, who only needs to carry on in that fine tradition set by his predecessor in making sure that the human toll is then contained as well. So there are all these levers being used, right? And hopefully it's being used well enough. And to be fair, there's plenty of buffers left,
of course,
right, that they can use. And hopefully, once all this passes through, then we can see Malaysia's fundamentals shine through again.
That's crazy. Okay, this conversation is still going to be continued on Astro AWANI. Just follow on all our channels and all our platforms. This is it from me for this particular evening. Thanks very much for watching. Goodbye.